I'd like to first have the distinct pleasure of introducing my ambassador, Paul Beresford-Hill, for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Debbie, and welcome to you all, excellencies, distinguished guests, and distinguished visitors to the ECOSOC chamber at the United Nations. I'm welcoming you to a very, very special event sponsored by the Sovereign Order of Malta, Permanent Observer Mission to the UN here in New York. While our sovereignty as a state is circumscribed by the limits of our territorial footprint, our mission is global and extends far beyond our seat of government in Rome. As a permanent observer, our focus is less on our own nationalistic or partisan confines and our citizens, rather than being in one geographic location, are those throughout the world who are left behind. The forgotten people on our planet that we serve through medical, social, and educational programs and facilities in over 120 countries. Our citizens at the Sovereign Order of Malta are refugees. They are migrants. They are the survivors of war and natural disaster. And they are also the victims of human trafficking and modern slavery, a virulent evil that knows no boundaries, enslaves millions upon millions of innocent women, men, and children, and which permeates all corners of the globe. For decades, the Sovereign Order of Malta has been fighting against this evil and has taken a proactive stance in respect of its eradication, working with an array of both secular and faith-based organizations and partners. Today represents a milestone as we present to the United Nations and the World Health Organization a protocol developed in collaboration with global strategic operatives. A protocol which emanated from a meeting 4 years ago in this very room, and a protocol which owes both its inception, its drive, and its energy to our host today, Debbie O'Hara-Ruskowski. Almost 90% of human trafficked victims seek medical assistance during their time in captivity. We want healthcare professionals throughout the world to have the tools to identify these patients and to provide an intervention with civic and other authorities that will set them free. This is simply what we are committed to doing. And I'll now hand over to my special advisor on human trafficking, Ms. Debbie O'Hara-Ruskowski, who will lead the program. Debbie, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Paul, for your kind introduction, but more importantly, thank you for your unwavering support of this project and your encouragement to see it to its completion. Everyone, this is a remarkable day. Many of you may have been in this very room back in November 2018, and I do recognize some of you that were here. And consisting of a couple of panel of speakers in the morning, but then in the afternoon, we rolled up our sleeves to make some very practical decisions. It was then that we decided to focus primarily on educating the healthcare systems and their providers and personnel within the systems, based on studies that the ambassador inferred, the showing 88 to 92% of all survivors seek medical care while being trafficked. Here we sit, almost 4 years to the day, to deliver on a promise we made, that we would conduct such trainings, but also adding a pilot research study made up of both national and international healthcare site participants. We would bring the human trafficking training to each site, help them learn how to identify a suspected human trafficking victim, and then know the appropriate action to take. We had to teach a clinical paradigm shift for providers and others to see these patients as victims, despite what they were dressed like, despite if they were drug-seeking behavior. During this process, we would also assist them in forming their own internal human trafficking task force, but perhaps most importantly, we would help them develop, create, and establish their own human trafficking policy and protocol with the involvement of their clinical leadership and community resources. Of course, COVID caused a worldwide pause and upset for everyone, and GSO was not spared. However, we used that time wisely. We hired a new GSO coordinator, Yolanda Green from Northwell Health. Yolanda, take a wave. There you go. And together, we refined our training materials, and from the feedback from some initial sites, we made it even more robust with clinical content. After we completed training at our last international sites this past spring, we began to collate and synthesize the research data and all 10 policies developed. We normalized them for cultural differences and then created the generic universal policy and protocol template, the final product which you have in your hands right now. And this protocol is unique in the sense that it can be customized to any place in the world of healthcare sites. And that is an important element. Not everybody has the same law enforcement or variables to put in, so we made it customizable. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the culmination of 4 years of hard work. A year to start up GSO, and 3 years to conduct the research pilot study trainings. But now we have the fruits of our labor to deliver to the World Health Organization, the first universal human trafficking policy and protocol for healthcare providers. Are there other policies out there? Absolutely, for sure. But there are some hidden gems. But there is no standardized best practices template that can be given to all health systems globally. We are so very proud of this accomplishment, but mostly because we believe it will help many caught in the horrors of human trafficking to restore their inherent dignity that was stolen from them. Now, I'd be remiss to go any further without saying a few thank yous, so I beg your patience. First, Kevin Highland, who we'll be seeing in a video in a moment, he pushed me to concentrate on policy, policy, policy. He's the in the GSO co-founder title. Without him, we wouldn't be here. I'm forever grateful, Kevin. I hope you're watching. I'd also like to mention and acknowledge all the hard work Kevin and others put into establishing the United Nations Delta 8.7, incredible work in collecting and reviewing data patterns and creating policy guides on what works to achieve Target 8.7 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And also wish to thank the UN ODC and Permanent Observer of the Holy See Mission for their important work, help, and all their support over the years. Next, Dr. Kathy Miller and Alex Johnson, who worked tirelessly helping me to get GSO launched that first year. And when Alex returned to school for her master's at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City, Tracy, you might want to hire her afterwards, Kathy and I worked together to strategize how to meet the goals we set out to reach. I'd like to thank all the healthcare CEOs involved. One, Bob Garrett from Hackensack Meridian Health, whom you'll meet shortly on the second panel. If not for their support, we would probably not have completed this study. You'll hear how critical it is to initially obtain the CEO's buy-in and that human trafficking training is part of their system's mission for any implementation to be successful within a healthcare system. I couldn't have conducted the U.S. pilots without the help of Petra Linden, from then Dignity Health, now Common Spirit. Petra brought a wealth of knowledge and practical experience which added to the quality of these sites' trainings. There's 10 pilot sites. Each had its own clinical champion. I just want to quickly acknowledge them. Baptist Health, Nada Joaquim. Advocate, and you will hear from Nada later. Advocate Aurora Health, Chicago, Karen Stanford, Don Moeller, Kathy Bender-Schwitch. Hello, I hope you're watching from Chicago. In Hackensack, Christina Ryu and Teresa Broderick. RWJ Barnabas Health, Dr. Anani Sajarol, Margaret Ames, and Marie-Carl Vilsu-Talti. At Northwell Health, Dr. Santosh Paulus, Caitlin Doyle, and Walanda Green. Internationally, the 5 sites there, KMCH Hospital and Medical College in Chennai, India, is Dr. P.M. Nair and Dr. Mani Devasitham. Both you'll hear from later. And thanks to Norwell for that introduction, Dr. Santosh. Catholic Hospital in Ethiopia, Dr. Belen Shawangazau, and introduced to us through World Youth Alliance, New York City, Tamrat Belachu. Many thanks to Tamrat and the team. In Nigeria, Ansela Catholic Hospital, Sister Judith Inyanga. And in the 2 sites in Italy, the University of the Sacred Heart in Rome, Alessandro Stivano, and University of Milan, Rosario Caruso. And a big shout out goes to Anna Sierra, Senior VP Patient Services at Greenwich Hospital, for being the translator extraordinaire, both for content and actual trainings. We'll hear from Anna after the panels. Finally, those responsible for the creation of the new human trafficking for healthcare providers policy and protocol, standardizing best practices into a template to be used worldwide. Of course, Dr. Kathy Miller, again, research professor from UT Tyler, Dr. Patricia Speck, hi Pat, along with her many colleagues from AFN, the Academy of Forensic Nursing, and UAB, University of Alabama, and Walanda Green, our GSGO coordinator. A labor of love with outstanding talent and expertise. Thank you is insufficient to express our gratitude. Now, please allow me to give a very warm welcome and attention to today's panel participants. We have a terrific panel today with a wealth of knowledge and experience. As mentioned, I'll be your moderator, so just some ground rules before we begin. I'll introduce each panelist and ask them a question relative to their background and experience. Each will have 5 minutes to answer. We will try to be conducive, and if you're really going over, we'll probably have an intern give you a piece of paper saying, okay, wrap it up, Jeopardy, okay? And so if you, the audience, have a question or a comment, please make a note of it, and we'll open it up for discussion at the end. And just the instruction, your monitors are all in front of you, and your microphones should be off. When you want to speak at the end, and I'll give this later, you just press the button and it will turn red. That indicates it's on. And then after you finish speaking, you should shut it off, okay? So again, a warm welcome to everyone attending. Thank you for being here. I know it was a challenge getting in here. So great many thanks to all of you for putting up with United Nations things. So let us begin with a video from Kevin Hyland in Ireland. Kevin is the former anti-slavery commissioner under Theresa May in the UK, and currently he's the global strategy director for the Santa Marta Group, the anti-human trafficking group at the Vatican. Please place your attention to the video.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists, can I say hello to everybody who's there at the United Nations General Assembly and to those who join us from around the world. Today we're talking about human trafficking and modern slavery, one of the worst human rights breaches on our planet. And I want to thank Deb O'Hara and the Order of the Knights of Malta for making this event happen today and for the work that we're talking about today. And this is really timely because the Walk Free Foundation, backed up by the International Organization of Migration and the International Labour Organization, recently produced figures showing that there is now in the region of 50 million people around the world who are suffering in human trafficking or modern slavery. That is 10 million increase on their last report of 2018. The shocking numbers across the world show that perhaps we are not doing a very good job on preventing this crime from happening. And worse still, even when victims come forward, they are not supported. Figures also show that way less than 1% of those victims come forward and get supported. And 99.98% of perpetrators who commit these crimes walk free. So there does need to be a change to the way we're addressing that. And that's why this event today is so important. I've always pushed for the fact that we should be changing this to a systemic approach, that the systems that work in the state, the systems that we engage with daily, should be there either preventing or responding to human trafficking. In fact, the Convention of the Council of Europe on Human Trafficking talks about this. It talks about the role of each part of society, including civil society, and the part they can play to prevent and to respond to human trafficking. One of those elements is, for example, the non-punishment principle that countries who have signed up to the Council of Europe Convention should implement, whereby those who commit crimes as a result of their traffickers or their trafficking, for example, document offences, or where they may be in the situation of forced labour where they may produce cannabis, they should not be penalised or punished for those acts and should be treated as victims. Research shows that many victims, whether during or after their trafficking, or when they are being in the process of being taken into their trafficking, engage with health services. And that's why it's so important that around the world we try to get healthcare professionals engaged on human trafficking, so they can identify, so they can respond, and they can implement prevention when they're out in the communities, perhaps in things like community nursing or community doctors, particularly in parts of the world where human trafficking is extremely prevalent, where there is poverty and other issues. But recently around the world, we have seen that some of the most vulnerable, some of the most marginalised are being affected again because of trafficking with the outset of the global pandemic. During that time, we saw that some of the most impoverished communities didn't have access to the vaccines. And yet there were still people looking for these people to use them in forced labour and exploitation. We saw that during the COVID times, the exploitation online increased as people started to use the internet to say, perhaps, watch children being exploited thousands of miles away from the comfort of their home in a wealthy city. So the way that human trafficking operates and the way the traffickers and the exploiters source their commodity, which is a human life, changes regularly. But what is important is that healthcare is a universal right. Of course, we know in some parts of the world people don't get what they're required to get, but many do. And if we look at organisations like the World Health Organization and its reach and its global capacity, as we saw with the work it did during the global pandemic, this is a good platform in a way to really scale up the response of human trafficking and how healthcare professionals on the ground could be that person to see that symptom, to see that sign, and perhaps direct someone into safety. When I was a police officer in London, one of the cases that I dealt with was very similar to that. A very vigilant nurse who had been on a course that was organised by my team saw what she thought was a trafficked victim in the A&E. The reason she thought this was because people were there watching this woman, and the signs and the symptoms that she saw that she was suffering from indicated to her that this could be a case of trafficking. The nurse then took the woman somewhere safe, out of sight of those who were looking out for her. and then they tried to get into that part of the hospital. She then called security and the police and contacted my unit. That one act by that nurse led to operations across Europe and as far as India, and with many, many traffickers and many scores of victims being supported. This is what we need to do. That case resulted in many people receiving long terms of imprisonment, victims receiving compensation, victims being released, victims seeing and feeling justice, and the criminal network destroyed and all their assets taken away from them. That did require professionalism from the police. It did require covert deployments. It did require specialist techniques and operations joined up across Europe. But that is the job and the function of law enforcement. That was my job then. The job of the nursing profession was to look after that woman, to look after her health. And her health included her well-being, to not be let go out again and to be re-traumatized and re-victimized. So collaboratively, and then working with NGOs who supported this particular woman and many others, we were able to bring down this criminal network. So I strongly commend the work of Deb O'Hara and the Order of the Knights of Malta. I really think healthcare professionals have a major role to play in starting to end the scourge of this exploitation of human beings, men, women, and children across the world. Currently, 50 million of them, earning at least $150 billion a year in criminal assets. So we all need to start doing this. We need to put this into systems. We need to be constantly reviewing those systems. We need to critically review ourselves and ask ourselves the question, is what we're doing actually making a difference? Bringing healthcare professionals into this agenda, I think, will really make a difference. Thank you very much for asking me to join you today in the United Nations at New York. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you for the event, and I hope the meeting goes well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Wish you were here too. I just want to remind everyone, in your concept note, you can follow along. The stapled copy has the program agenda with all the bios. We're not going to say all of them. They're just too immensely talented, so you can look at them yourselves, okay? Now I have the distinct pleasure and honor to introduce to you former United States Ambassador at Large to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, Mr. John Cotton Richmond. Ambassador, you were confirmed unanimously by the U.S. Senate to serve in the nation's highest-ranking position dedicated to combating human trafficking and leading foreign policy in the global fight. Among the many great things you've done, John, can you please share with us some highlights of your experience and insights that might lend support for having a worldwide policy for healthcare providers? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I have been privileged, I think, to get to think about human trafficking from a number of different lenses. I lived in India for a number of years doing direct work and casework with forced labor victims. Spent time as a federal prosecutor for a decade, focused on human trafficking cases, and then ultimately got to serve at the U.S. State Department, looking at it from a foreign policy lens. And I can tell you that as I look back over the last 22 years of work in fighting human trafficking, I think we are now at an inflection point. I think a lot has been accomplished in the last 22 years. We have this UN protocol against human trafficking that UNODC shepherds. One of the most widely adopted international legal instruments. That did not happen by accident over the last 22 years. That happened because of the hard work of many diplomats, of many individuals that got that through. And now we have every country in the world actually has a domestic law of some sort against trafficking. That is a massive historic accomplishment. after 4,000 years of recorded history in which slavery has been codified, has been legal, has been endorsed by cultures and communities and democracies. It is a stunning shift in history to actually have every country in the world agreeing now that
Your
human trafficking is
Excellencies,
wrong.
ladies and gentlemen.
We've also got the fact that civil society has learned lots of lessons during this period. We have learned about how to think through trauma-informed practices when we're doing investigations, how to interview differently, how to deal with issues, how to elevate survivors, including the survivors in this room today, into leadership, and to ask them for their opinions more than their stories. We've learned a great deal. But I do think that at this moment it is worth asking, how are we doing? Where do we actually stand in this fight? And I think the reality and the honest assessment is that we are losing the battle against traffickers. In spite of all the hard work that has been done, in spite of all the hard work by people in this room and throughout the movement. Kevin mentioned the recent estimate from the ILO. It's going in the wrong direction. When you think about shifting from, in 2017, the estimate of 24.9 million forced labor and sex trafficking victims to now 27.6 million, by the millions we are going in the wrong direction. When you think about the fact that governments have reported a 45% drop in global prosecutions since 2015, we know that traffickers are operating with impunity. We are not holding them accountable. And when it comes to victim identification, I think the statistics are as worse as they possibly could be. Last year, governments around the world reported identifying just north of 90,000 victims. Compared to the 27.6 million that we believe to exist, it means that we're identifying less than half of 1% of all the victims in the world. It's actually 0.32% of the victims are being identified and getting a chance for services. It means 99.68 victims in the world are still trapped and wondering if all of our speeches, of all the words that we utter, all the awareness ribbons that we pin on, all of the sustainable development goals that we elevate mean anything. They're wondering if help will come. And so I think that if a student brought back those as marks, they would receive a failing grade. I worry that we, in spite of all of our work, may also receive that failing grade, which means that at this point in history, at this inflection point, I think we need to professionalize, we need to elevate as a movement, we need to lift our works beyond just intentions. We need to make sure that we are delivering results. We need massive investments in public justice and social service delivery systems to build out the infrastructure that is necessary. We need to match the $150.2 billion in global revenue that is out there. And that's why I'm excited about this human trafficking policy and protocol for global healthcare providers, because it contributes to this idea of professionalizing this movement and this effort. It recognizes that human trafficking, although we can't reduce it to a public health problem, we know that so many trafficking victims, many of the victims that I have worked with over the years, are engaging healthcare systems while they're being trafficked. Work like this new protocol, if adopted and implemented, could actually improve our victim identification rates and turn healthcare providers into people that are actually advancing this fight. I am excited about what is possible, about what we're able to do, and grateful to the leadership of the Sovereign Order of Malta in this work. And I'm grateful to all of you, talented, hardworking people in this room. I'm glad you're in this fight. Together, we can challenge each other, and we can challenge our governments to prioritize freedom, not just with our rhetoric, but with our resources. I'm grateful to learn from you all today.
Many thanks, John, Mr. Ambassador. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Bethany Beisenthal, a partner at Jones Day Law Firm in Chicago. Bethany, after reading about you, you have had an amazing career. And later I want to ask you if you need 24/7 security, but that's off topic. So seriously, can you please share how your work at Jones Day and other places, both as a human trafficking prosecutor and now as a chair of human trafficking litigation, has made you realize the importance of implementing a policy and protocol such as GSO is proposing?
Yes.
Thank you, Beth.
Very much, Deb. And thank you for the opportunity, because it is my pleasure and honor to speak about the importance of implementing a policy and protocol for healthcare providers to detect human trafficking. So from my perspective as a former prosecutor and current lawyer for survivors of human trafficking, this protocol is not just important, it's actually necessary. If we're ever going to achieve or get anywhere near achieving the global goal of eradicating human trafficking. It's also necessary to empower victims of human trafficking to become survivors. And that comes from a couple of different reasons based on my experience. And the first, based on my experience as a former federal prosecutor, this protocol is mission critical to law enforcement. So as you know, the protocol empowers healthcare providers to gather information, to ask questions, and to report to law enforcement when appropriate. It happens all too often that by the time a human trafficking situation is reported to law enforcement, it's years of trafficking has occurred. And the healthcare space is oftentimes the only one safe space where a survivor of trafficking is separated from his or her trafficker for a moment in time. So that room and that setting is a real opportunity. But without a protocol and without consistent policies, that opportunity is lost. This protocol will take us a step further in our goal and effort to help with that early reporting to law enforcement, which will disrupt the human trafficking situations much earlier than they're currently being disrupted. Second, and this comes from my experience in both as a prosecutor, but then also now in representing survivors of human trafficking as they seek justice through the judicial system, this protocol is going to go a long way in corroborating the survivors' voices, which is imperative to them as they seek their justice and speak their truth. So as everyone knows, I mean, corroborating a human trafficking survivor is oftentimes very difficult. I can't begin to tell you the number of times I've had a survivor say to me, well, I did go to a hospital at one point. So if you go and talk to the doctor, or if you pull the records, you'll see that what I'm telling you now is the truth. And we go back and we do try to get those records, and there's nothing there. Not because the survivor's not telling the truth, but because there is no consistent method for gathering and maintaining that data. So this protocol will go a long way in empowering those voices, corroborating what the survivor has to say, allowing them to seek their justice through truth. And finally, I think this protocol, from my perspective, empowers victims of human trafficking to become survivors. So many survivors have told me and others that I've worked with over the past years in human trafficking that, you know, maybe the one way that they would have been able to escape, find the strength to escape from their trafficking situation would be to encounter someone who they trust and who's in a position of power, and have that person say to them, I believe you, very importantly, I understand you, and I can help. So who better to answer that extremely high call than healthcare providers, and this protocol will put them in a position in which they can do that. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I stand in very strong support of the protocol.
Thank you so much, Bethany, and what you describe as trauma-informed care, and you're right. Being a nurse, I'm a little bit biased that we are the right people to implement that. Thank you so much. So now I'm happy to introduce Mr. Bill Wolf. And he's a former detective on gang investigations, executive director of Just Ask Prevention Project, and director of the National Human Trafficking Intelligence Center. DOJ Senior Executive overseeing a $100 million budget to support human trafficking programs across the U.S. I think we need to talk later, Bill. Bill, you were responsible for a very large arrest, which you received the Presidential Medal for Extraordinary Efforts to Combat Trafficking in Persons for. We've learned through our healthcare trainings just how critically important a strong relationship is with local law enforcement. It's definitely part of our protocol, as Bethany, you mentioned. Can you share some of your experiences, insights that emphasize the importance of this relationship between law enforcement and the healthcare system? And full disclosure, I did talk with Bill that he's married to a nurse, so I have a bias too.
Well, thank you, Deb, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for all of your work on this issue. And as Deb mentioned, a little bit of a cliche, as a police officer, I married a nurse. And you know, as our relationship progressed, as my career in law enforcement progressed, and I started to get involved in this human trafficking space, I remember one night my wife coming home from work after working a midnight shift in labor and delivery, and she said, "I think that I had a patient last night that's somebody that you might know." And I said, "Oh, who was it?" And she started to describe that she thought this individual was a victim of human trafficking. At the time, I was working very closely with a local program called Youth for Tomorrow, and I said, "Oh, was she a resident at that program?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, how did you know that she was a victim of human trafficking?" And she started to articulate to me the different warning signs, the red flags that she saw. And I said, "Well, what'd you do about it?" And she said, "Well, I delivered the baby." And I said, "Well, what about the human trafficking piece?" And she says, "Well, I don't know what to do. They don't teach us. They don't provide us with a protocol." And I said, wow. First of all, it's a little embarrassing considering my position, but the fact that they are able to identify in that moment when they're away from their trafficker and be able to provide intervention, but not knowing what to do. See, oftentimes we work in silos. Sometimes we get tunnel vision based on the mission that's been laid out before us. And in healthcare, it is to provide for the care of the patient. But it's also a unique opportunity to identify somebody that may be being exploited in that moment and to provide necessary intervention services. See, I think it's important that when we start to look at how we attack human trafficking, what is the next steps in our fight against human trafficking? That we have diversity at the table, diversity of opinion, diversity of lived experience, diversity of knowledge and base, but also diversity of industry. It's not just law enforcement's job to solve this problem. This is something that truly is going to take everyone coming together and working collaboratively to overcome. As Deb mentioned, in my role at the U.S. Department of Justice, I oversaw a program called the Enhanced Collaborative Model Task Force. This was an effort across the United States to engage law enforcement and other stakeholders in the fight to end human trafficking. And I oftentimes remember working with the different task forces, and they'd come to us and they would say, "Well, who should we have at the table?" And every time my answer was, everyone. We need to have everyone, including healthcare. They are critical in this fight to end human trafficking. It's also critically important that we have standards that Deb mentioned to be able to establish training that is victim-centered, trauma-informed, and is going to speak to that industry. There is a lot of human trafficking training out there, but I think a lot of my colleagues and experts in the room can agree it's not all great training. We have got to be able to start to move the needle by setting those standards to make sure that law enforcement is getting the training that they need, but others that may interdict in these situations, like healthcare providers, also have the necessary training that they need. We have to collaborate across the spectrum. Organizations like Safe House Project that provide online training for healthcare, partnering with GSO to provide the in-person training is critically important. So I am thankful for your work, your commitment and dedication to creating this incredible protocol that I truly believe is going to enhance the ability of healthcare to identify human trafficking and enhance collaboration across the field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And I just want to reiterate, what Bill said, or his wife, they don't know what to do when they identify in the healthcare system, many systems. I myself, back in the day in the ICU and the ED, you have a gut feeling, and so many times after our trainings, and many of the GSO clinicians are here, the nurses, doctors, social workers, everyone will come up and say, I wish I had had this sooner, because I know there were some in the past few years that I should have done more for. And I said, forget the regret now, move forward. But thank you so much. And just a shout out to Safe House Project. Christy's here, and they did a beautiful job helping the Order of Malta with the volunteer online modular program. So thank you, Christy. So now I'm very excited to introduce a dear friend and colleague, Miss Heather Fisher. Heather is former Special Advisor of Human Trafficking at the White House, current Senior Advisor, Human Rights Crimes with Thomson Reuters in Washington, D.C. Heather, we met many years ago, and I think you were here in the original November, oh boy. Yep, we go way back. But it's been a pleasure to watch your professional journey flourish, and you've done so much. But I'd like to ask you now about an exciting project you are currently involved, partnering with the OSCE in efforts to help the Ukrainian refugee women specifically. Can you share with us a little bit about that and tell us how you feel our GSO work and universal policy can be beneficial in that way?
Yes, of course. Good morning. I'm Heather Fisher, and I'm Senior Advisor for Human Rights Crimes at Thomson Reuters Special Services, and I want to thank Ambassador Brestard-Hill and Advisor Deb O'Hara-Ruskowski and the whole team here today, most of you I know, thankfully, for inviting me to this important discussion today. As many of you have already heard here, this protocol is a culmination of several years of hard work, dedication, and partnership during a pandemic, no less. Thanks to the leadership of those that are here, I have had the great privilege of seeing this important training for medical providers come to fruition. At the invitation of Kevin Highland, I was here in this room 4 years ago when this group endeavored to take up on this audacious project, and thanks to Deb's tenacity and leadership and the collective group who all participated, the protocol is ready for adoption. Though the United States Congress passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 and the Palermo Protocols were adopted 22 years ago, professionals and communities around the world and across the United States often misinterpret or altogether fail to recognize the signs of human trafficking and exploitation right here in our midst. Regrettably, the topic of human trafficking is largely absent from the halls of academia, medical schools, and residency programs. Students routinely graduate from their programs with little to no education in this area. In the regular course of practice, physicians like my own mother and her colleagues provided compassionate care in exam rooms and child advocacy centers in New York State and on humanitarian missions with the World Health Organization. And even though they're providing compassionate care to children and adults experiencing extreme forms of abuse and trauma, they failed to understand the precise form of abuse that was taking place, which was human trafficking. This is a far too common problem. The indicators for human trafficking are routinely missed and classified as domestic violence, familial child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, or another type of abuse. While those elements might be a part of a patient's experience, the signs of forced labor or exchanging sexual acts for something of value is indeed human trafficking. Early research tells us that patients experiencing exploitation are likely to seek medical care while under the control of their trafficker, making professional development for healthcare providers not only strategic but critical. I too became educated about human trafficking in the United States well after I graduated from college. And once I understood the exploitation occurring in my own community in New York State, providing trafficking-related professional development to community stakeholders became my full-time passion and eventually became my full-time vocation. One night I was called by federal law enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations, to the emergency room at Albany Medical Center here in New York State to assist with a young woman I had been working with who had been brutally beaten. And when the same nurse entered the exam room, the federal agent and I gave the staff a quick crash course on human trafficking. That overview for the staff was critical to ensuring that their approach with the patient would be trauma-informed, Meanwhile, the patient was waiting in the exam room, wondering whether or not she should simply leave. Though she had disclosed that she had been trafficked against her will, she had experienced stigma so severe in the past that she was deeply fearful that she would be judged, or worse, not believed. How tragic is it that the healthcare providers who are mostly reactive in their approach to human trafficking survivors, and how many survivors arrive in emergency rooms without the benefit of advocate and law enforcement by their side? Patients experiencing human trafficking routinely seek medical care, but not exclusively at emergency rooms. They also frequent the offices of neurologists, OBGYNs, child abuse pediatricians, and other specialists. All of these professionals provide care to patients experiencing exploitation and therefore must be equipped to meet the unique needs of that population appropriately. Community stakeholders, including healthcare providers, benefit from professional development on the topics of human trafficking and exploitation, and thanks to this project, medical professionals across the United States are now learning the signs of exploitation and what to do when they see the indicators. This resource is designed to go beyond simply recognizing the signs of human trafficking to providing compassionate care for patients experiencing exploitation. The contributors to the protocol are medical professionals who have consistently offered compassionate care to their patients experiencing trafficking, and because of their remarkable care, their patients are returning to them, and this is unique. Continuity of care for a patient during their exploitation is not common, but because the providers in the pilot are committed to comprehensive treatment, patients are coming back to them again and again. Providing appropriate compassionate care to survivors of human trafficking is not simply good bedside manner. It is the necessary intervention. Healthcare providers play a critical role in bringing justice to survivors of human trafficking. The next step is to see the protocol recognized as a best practice in identifying the signs of human trafficking and scaling up the training program so that providers can refer victims to appropriate services. This holistic, coordinated services approach is what it looks like to be truly victim-centered. And I'm really pleased to work alongside of this group. I'm excited to partner with Deb and the group here also to expand our efforts to Ukrainian victims and survivors as well. And I'm glad to be a part of the collaboration that is putting the protocols in place to safeguard people from human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Always a pleasure. So now I'm honored to introduce a woman who has done so much domestically, but is now involved very much internationally. Ms. Ann Basham, CEO at Ascend Consulting and chair of the Task Force of Human Trafficking for the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum. Ann, can you share some of your work on the Parliamentary Forum and how it may emphasize the importance of our proposed policy and protocol for healthcare providers around the globe?
Thanks, Deb, so much. Well, as many of you may know, human trafficking is, of course, the greatest humanitarian crisis of our time. As we know from a recent report that hopefully many of you have read by the International Labor Organization and UNIOM, there are approximately 50 million people enslaved currently right now in the world. That's nearly 1 out of every 150 individuals who is trapped in modern slavery. This is more than the total of the 400 years of transatlantic slave trade.
Excuse me, Ann, just talk more into the microphones.
Is it not hearing?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
No problem. Let me pull it forward. This fact should send alarm bells. Does that work? Yeah. Okay, good. For the world, and encourage everyone that this is all hands on deck. This leads to global leaders, legislators, business leaders, parents, teachers, faith leaders, and professionals. Just as an example of this, I have a friend who called me actually last week. She was traveling. She is not involved in the anti-trafficking movement, but she is educated in the indicators of human trafficking. And she saw what she suspected was an incident of human trafficking. So she called me, but she did not know what to do. She was less confident in how to respond. And this is common, because awareness is only half the battle. The journey out of trafficking can only begin when someone recognizes what is happening and knows how to respond appropriately. As we've said here today, 88% of trafficking victims access health care at some point during the journey. but they are unlikely to be noticed by healthcare professionals if they do not recognize the signs or feel confident that they know how to respond. Human trafficking, as Ambassador Richmond mentioned, is illegal in almost every country in the world, and yet it is prevalent in every country in the world. Most people do not recognize it, and even fewer know what to do when they see it. With recent increases in armed conflicts and cross-border migration all around the world, there is not only a need for enhanced collaboration, but also a consensus on standardized response protocol that engages key civil society actors, especially those in the healthcare sector. Human traffickers are organized, and the most effective efforts to combat them are organized as well. As the new ILO report recommends, cooperation between governments and the social partners is vital to building lasting, consensus-based solutions to the challenge. As Deb mentioned, I lead an international task force on human trafficking for the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum. It's a consortium of members of Parliament, Congress, government leaders, and policy experts from around the world. And we convene for the purpose of providing solutions to stop human trafficking. We represent currently all 6 continents and 15 countries. I had the privilege of visiting Romania twice this year, and I was impressed with the response to reducing human trafficking vulnerabilities during the Ukraine crisis. Here, the world is witnessing the fruitfulness of organized, unified efforts to protect the vulnerable people of Ukraine, and this is to be applauded. But as I work with global leaders in other countries who are receiving a sudden influx of refugees or are at risk of armed conflict themselves, I find myself asking, what about the rest of the world? There are currently 27 armed conflicts around the world, 27. And we know that armed conflict between countries produces a high risk of human trafficking. The UN Palermo Protocol provided a universal definition of human trafficking in beings, and it is imperative that we begin serious discussions about universal standardized indicators of human trafficking and a standardized multi-sector response protocol, such as what is being presented here today. The alarming new global estimates for modern slavery sound a worldwide call for all hands on deck. And this should encourage every person, especially those in the medical sector, to recognize the signs and know how to respond effectively. And I'll leave you with this. Traffickers operate with advanced criminal networks, and survivors of trafficking should also have advanced networks of identification and care. Thank you.
And thank you so very much. I just want to put in a plug here because the Order of Malta got very involved with Jones Day and with the Ukrainian crisis, and we did a little push communication that I shared with you, Heather and Ann, and we tried to collate all the messages that were in Romania and all the other places on the borders, and what we put together was we didn't say the word trafficking, because they wouldn't have understood it. We said, beware of kidnappers, and don't take your eyes off children, and very practical advice. But we translated it into 6 languages of all the bordering states because of the tsunami, really. We say we're shoveling against the tide, shoveling against a tsunami now of people coming and getting picked up by traffickers. So thank you ever so much for all that you're doing, and we're trying to get in that space as well to help, so thank you. Now, I have the great privilege to introduce our survivor. And she's not only a survivor, she's done a lot, but she's taken this horrific experience of being trafficked and dedicated her life to try and make an impact, to change laws and policies in an effort to end the scourge of human trafficking. Ms. Tanya Gould also has received the Presidential Award for extraordinary efforts to combat trafficking. We do have an impressive panel, wouldn't you say? Yeah. And I'm so very proud to have her as a member of GSO. Tanya, please share why you see our GSO policy work so important from your perspective as a survivor and a leader in changing laws and policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to first say thank you for inviting me. And also thank you for being open and willing to bring on survivor leaders for not just their experiences, but also for their expertise. So thank you. The physical and psychological scars of this lived experience is very complicated. Who better than the medical community to be the ones at the forefront, teaching its allies in other fields how to correctly respond? But they need the tools. They need the resources, the policies, the training, a map, the framework. Putting our resources into the medical community is a trauma-informed, victim-centered response. When thinking of human trafficking and serving this population, one's first thought should be around the prosperity of the person versus anything else. So the question should be, how can I serve this person in a way that would help lead them towards prosperity? Medical experts already understand what it takes to heal on many different levels. Healing, is it not also a form of prosperity? We all trust the medical community as a whole because our lives sometimes depend on it. Victims and survivors often face life and death situations. Having our medical professionals equipped is helpful because it is a universal thought that if one is a part of the medical community, that person may be our only hope to live. Creating policies and protocols to support medical professionals to identify those who are trafficked is the beginning and key that may unlock an understanding for the rest of those in the continuum of care for those working with those with lived experience. As a survivor of human trafficking, I was able to find medical help eventually. This kind of prosperity shouldn't be hard to find. To end, having a universal tip response to guide medical professionals is, in my opinion, a very basic and fundamental way towards helping the world understand the effects of this lived experience. Giving resources and tools to the medical community giving resources and tools to the medical community allows them to take the issue and help the rest of the world make sense of something so complex. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you very, very much. And it is important to have survivors be part of both of these panels. And so first, you'll be hearing a lot, of course, of GSO trainings referenced. GSO is a survivor-led training, hence the reason we have the survivors here. We start all of our trainings with a survivor sharing their experience. It always sets the stage. And it should remind us of all the reasons we do this work. Jasmine Grace Marino Fiandaca, if I have it correctly, met 10 years ago, she and I, when we were introduced by our mutual Boston Homeland Security friend, Peter Damasio. And the three of us became the team who went around New England teaching every sector, government, universities, airports, law enforcement, healthcare. No matter where we went, Jasmine was the keynote speaker, especially at universities when the girls really wanted to ask, Jasmine, why didn't you get out of it? So I'll let her answer that. Those efforts were part of the reason we had to have the 2018 meeting. We knew we needed to focus and to be more effective. Jasmine was also involved in many of the research pilot study trainings, and now, most recently, we're working together again, opening up safe homes, and that's for another future meeting, right? It's always my pleasure and heartfelt honor to introduce Jasmine Grace. I've asked her to give you a snapshot of her story. It's worthwhile hearing. You have the floor, Jaz.
Thanks, Deb. I am so grateful to be here today to share a bit of my story, experience, continuing to raise awareness after all these years. I've been out of the commercial sex trade for over 15 years. Today, a wife and homeschool mom, 2 kids. I make fun of myself. I drive a minivan. Never would have imagined I can be who I am today, but really, through my recovery and my faith, have been able to spread hope all the way down to the women that are still out there on the street struggling, as my mission as an outreach worker to reach the most vulnerable, drug-addicted women who have no hope. And in the spare time, speaking on panels and to law enforcement and healthcare providers to educate and make aware that the victims are out there. In order to become survivors, they need to self-identify first. And during my whole time in the commercial sex trade, which would be 5 years with a trafficker, and then 3 years on my own, unfortunately, due to a drug addiction and only knowing that way, I saw my healthcare provider the entire time. I saw my primary care physician, the same one since I was 18, at least once to twice a month, always self-diagnosing myself, all types of issues from anxiety to depression to ADHD, whatever I could. I was just trying to medicate, self-medicate to take away the pain. I just wanted that pain to go away. And unfortunately, my doctor was always too busy making notes on his computer rather than looking me in the eyes and offering me that self-care, like compassion. And I wasn't able to self-identify. I didn't have the language. I wasn't going to tell anybody that I was a prostitute because those words are too stigmatized and shameful. So I was misdiagnosed or misidentified, actually, as a DV victim. And I did see someone in that hospital, one time. And my trafficker didn't go to my appointments with me. I was in mental and emotional bondage, right? So it was like almost being in a cult. I did what I had to do. I went where I had to go. But when I sought care, he didn't come. And I saw that therapist at the DV clinic one time and, again, wasn't able to verbalize. But she gave me some tools for my toolbox. And this is what I always share with healthcare providers, that this is so great, this protocol and what we're doing here today. And when you meet a victim, they may not be ready to exit. But what you're doing is so important, because when you can identify and offer support and services, you plant little seeds of hope along the way that maybe one day when they are ready to exit, they know there's another way out. Because for so long, I thought I was going to be a no-good, dirty prostitute forever, because that's what my trafficker ingrained in my mind, and that became my identity. But somewhere deep inside, I knew there was a better story. I knew I wasn't created for that. Because, right, no little girl dreams of becoming a prostitute. We have big dreams, we have goals, but because of our vulnerabilities, because of the early childhood abuse, whatever it is, how we get involved in the commercial sex trade and become so trapped, and you have no hope. It's a hopeless way of life. So just offering that hope, offering a way out is so monumental, and I am so grateful to be part of that project, on the panel to share my expertise and everything that I've been through. That it's all for a good. Everything that happened is for good. So I'm so grateful. Thank you.
I just love you, Jasmine. There's nothing more I can say. She's amazing, and it's an honor to work with her. One thing that she pointed out, it's on average 7 times that a victim may go into an emergency department or healthcare setting and before they are ready to be accepting for help. So that's an important thing. Tell the healthcare providers, don't expect instant gratification, right? So now that's a tough act to follow, Bob.
Sure is.
But I know you can handle it. Allow me now to introduce Mr. Robert Garrett, CEO of Hackensack Meridian Health, New Jersey. Bob Garrett is not a typical CEO, unfortunately, because they all should be like him. When I first approached Bob if he was interested in Hackensack Meridian Health being involved in our human trafficking pilot study, without hesitation, he answered, "This is a no-brainer. Of course we are." Bob truly is a pioneer in this field, as are all the other GSO pilot site CEOs. But Bob, you come from a unique geography, New Jersey, where there is a mandate in place that all healthcare personnel must be trained on human trafficking. But you also have an incredible system set up locally regarding reporting and requesting help. You have your own New Jersey human trafficking hotline, which every place should. I'd love for you to briefly discuss why it's so important for you and other CEOs to be on board to do the right thing, even if it's not a revenue generator, and if you can share with us the impact that GSO training and policy had on your system long term, that'd be terrific. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Deb. And first, I just want to thank you for your not only your leadership but your passion on fighting human trafficking. It's just amazing. And Deb told a story about how I didn't hesitate. I didn't because I think it's such an important issue. I also didn't hesitate because I've learned you don't say no to Deb. Here we are, a few years later, and I'd like to share my story. And I apologize, us CEOs of health systems tend to bring a few slides along to keep us on track. I don't know if we have them ready to put up there or not. Yep. Do we? Yep. Okay, great. They're there. Okay, great. Yes. So some of the statistics on this first slide, if you can just roll to the next slide. Some of the statistics people have already mentioned, so I'm not going to go through in detail. But just one thing that stands out, is 167 countries around the world and on every continent. And there's a common misperception out there that this is not a U.S. issue, and it sure is a U.S. issue. It's a New Jersey issue. It is a national issue for our country. $150 billion industry around the world, just really, really disturbing and incredible. If you can go to the next slide. These statistics also really tell the story and why it's so important that providers get together on this common policy and protocol. We have already mentioned, many of the speakers have mentioned, about 90% of victims seeking medical attention. But I also want to focus on this slide on the 70% that go through the emergency department. And that's why the training is so important for emergency department personnel, our nurses, our physicians, and we have some that are here from Hackensack Meridian Health. I know there's others from some of the other health systems. And if I can just take a moment, in terms of them, what they've been able to do, not only being champions in fighting human trafficking, but what they've been through in these last 2.5 years in COVID, they're true American heroes. Let's give them a round of applause if we could. We go to the next slide. Debbie mentioned that I became very passionate about this. I think it's just a moral imperative, and it's consistent with our mission. Our mission is to transform healthcare, to be the leader of positive change. How can you be the leader of positive change if you know there's a public health crisis going on in the communities that you serve and you do nothing about it? I feel it's very consistent with our mission, very consistent with one of our top strategic priorities, which is to promote health equity and dignity to improve the health of our communities. I view myself as the chief mission officer, so not just the CEO of our health system, but I need to live and breathe that mission. I need to walk the walk and talk the talk. So I think it's important that the leader of any organization gets out in front and is consistent on a very big issue like human trafficking. Next slide. We partnered with the Global Strategic Objectives, GSO, in 2019. But before that, as Deb mentioned, New Jersey made it a law to screen and to train healthcare personnel. But it really expanded to a whole new level after our partnership with GSO. We had a 2-day event to kick off that partnership at our flagship hospital at Hackensack University Medical Center. It was attended by representatives of the GSO, including Deb, and also law enforcement, Homeland Security, FBI, state police, local police, so that there was a real coordinated effort with the Hackensack Meridian team. And then we launched a pilot. We were one of, I think, 5 or 6 across the country that started to pilot these consistent protocols. And Deb mentioned it in her introduction. It's important that law enforcement get involved early on because each community is a little different in terms of how they would handle identification of human trafficking victims. Next slide. One of the, and I want to talk a little bit about what the future lies because we've done some training, we've had some successes, but we shouldn't stop here. So one of the programs we have at Hackensack Meridian is a digital platform called Unite Us, and we actually screen people who come in contact with our health system for the social determinants of health. What I want to do is expand that to also screen people who come in contact with our health system, whether that's in a physician's office, an urgent care center, a hospital. I want to screen those people who might be victims of human trafficking or might show signs that they are of high risk. Why this is so important? Because in 1 year since this social determinant screening program has been launched, we have screened over 400,000 individuals, and we've made 1 million referrals for people to get help. I'm hoping we're going to have the same success as we extend this to human trafficking. Next slide. Another new initiative that we're embarking on, we have our own School of Medicine, the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine. We are now making it a mandatory part of the curriculum for future doctors, meaning medical students, to be educated and trained on human trafficking and what a public health crisis it is. We have a program within our School of Medicine called Human Dimension. Medical students follow individuals and communities for their 3 or 4 years of medical education, mostly in underserved areas. They now will be equipped with the tools to really look out for potential victims of human trafficking as they're following those individuals and families. So we're really excited about that initiative as well. Next slide, please. And then we're going to continue the training in our hospitals. We're going to incorporate the training on grand rounds throughout our health network. We just recently did a grand rounds at Hackensack University Medical Center. We're also going to extend training not just to clinical personnel, but to non-clinical team members as well. And then lastly, just to wrap it all up, I could not be more in favor of these the standardized policy and protocols that we're all here to discuss today. Think about it even from the clinical perspective. When common protocols have been adopted, healthcare outcomes have improved significantly throughout the history, really, of healthcare. It's important we adopt this. I urge my colleagues out there that are running hospitals or health systems to really adopt these protocols, and I urge the World Health Organization to do the same. So thank you for your time, and Debbie, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Bob. You know, you truly are a pioneer and visionary. You talk about that unite us, and then the curricula, and then the continued training. I mean, this is exactly what every healthcare system has to do, and thank you for representing every healthcare system. Thank you. So, our next panelist guest really needs no further introduction, but she has been, Dr. Kathy Miller has been the research machine for all the GSO pilot study sites. She's from UT Tyler, Texas, where she's a professor of nursing and research. She fortunately helped GSO get an IRB way back when and lead our GSO research team. Now she'll share the results of our work along with and explaining a little bit why the protocol is so important for others to adapt in all the countries. Kathy?
Thank you. Do you happen to have my slides available? Great. Well, first of all, before we get started, I hope you didn't go to sleep at the first mention of research, because I think half the room probably did. I promise to keep the minutia and the fine details to a minimum. However, any of you that are academics or clinicians that do want to know more about the rigor and the validity and the testing of the type of research that we did, my contact information is in front of you. So first, let's talk about why it was so important to conduct some research, important research, prior to developing a standardized and generalizable globally policy and procedure protocol. First, we want to always, in endeavoring to create policy and procedures in the healthcare sector or any sector, base that on evidence. We did have some evidence out there, some prior research that was done that trafficking in persons education did help healthcare providers increase their confidence and so on and so forth. But there was nothing out there in the literature that said if we adopt a policy and procedure, does that increase provider confidence? Does it increase recognition of victims? Does it increase the delivery of survivor-informed and trauma-informed care? Does it increase apprehensions and prosecutions of traffickers? Does it decrease the re-victimization of the victims? So in that vein, we undertook to do 2 studies. It was a replication study. The first one was cross-sectional, in which our participant organizations were 5 of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. Then we replicated that study internationally with 5 participant organizations globally. So next slide, please. First, before I get started, very quickly, I need to, from my heart, this was a gigantic, throughout COVID, research team. If you are from either one of our participating organizations, research and clinical team from any of our sites domestically or globally, and if you are one of my research assistants, my honors students, Kevin and Andrea and Dr. Stufert, if you would please stand and be recognized, because without this gigantic team effort, this would not happen. Stand up, very quickly. Research teams. Research teams, I have so many, they're all here, so they're just being, so thank you very much for recognizing them, because they have worked tirelessly throughout COVID, and that just shows the need for what we are doing. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read these to you, but what we wanted to ask is, once we, okay, let me get my thoughts together. Once we actually deployed the intervention, which was the evidence-based, survivor-informed, trauma-informed healthcare provider education on trafficking in persons, did that increase the provider's confidence in recognizing victims, and did it increase or decrease the provider's confidence in providing trauma-informed care? The next was sort of the same as far as the third research question, and it had to do with the policy and procedures. Because we all know that we get this education, we get these CMEs and CNEs just shoved down our throats, CLEs all the time, right? But even though you have the education, if you don't have that policy and procedure to guide your actions afterwards, you may not be in compliance with your organization's policies and procedures. You may not be in compliance with local, regional, tribal laws. So the policy and procedure, the so what, the now what is critical. And so the research question 3 and 4 was, after the adoption or prior to the adoption of policy and procedures, how confident were you in your ability to recognize, right? How confident were you in your ability to respond in a trauma-informed manner? So you can see all of those, and they're in your thing. So let's go to the next slide, which is what you want to see, which is the results, right? You don't want to hear me talk. Let's talk results. So next slide, please. All right, what you'll see here is you'll see the the United States pilot study, and then you will see the replicated study internationally. The red and blue lines are before. So before your education, your survivor-informed, trauma-informed, evidence-based education, what was your confidence level in identifying victims? What was your confidence level in providing care? And if you see that you can very clearly on this graph, you can see a very statistically significant increase after the education. Before the adoption of policies and procedures, and after the adoption of policies and procedures. So, and what really struck me was that even though this was in the United States and we replicated internationally, that it's almost identical findings, right? So there is a hunger for the guidance, not only for the education on trauma-informed care, survivor-informed care in the clinical setting, but also what now? What do I do now? Next slide, please. And one of the very critical elements that Jasmine touched on and Tanya touched on as well is that the recriminalization, right? We see so many of these potential victims, and we think, oh, they're drug seeking, or they're there for a sexually transmitted infection or a domestic violence issue. I could go on past my time limit. But so we also wanted to know, after your education, did that increase your ability to recognize these victims as crime victims and not perpetrators of crime. And therein lies the next round of study that the GSO will probably be working with survivors and law enforcement. Okay, so next slide. These were our findings. So you can see very statistically significant findings that after education, domestically and internationally, healthcare providers said, yes, now I see these may be crime victims, not criminals. Next. So in the discussion, I'm just going to cut that short because I think I'm going over time, but you can see that our findings in 2 studies, one domestically, the other replicated internationally, is that our empiric findings strongly support the consideration and adoption of a standardized, generalizably, globally framework to guide the development of policies and procedures for healthcare providers. We talked about the increase in confidence in the recognition and the delivery of care, and we also recognize that providers after education will be more likely to recognize victimization and not as criminals. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. This is critically important, and I know you didn't go through some of the numbers because we have someone sitting right next to you who is an amazing leader, nursing leader from one of the sites, and she gives a glimpse of some of the numbers. Let me do a proper introduction for Nada. I am so very proud to introduce this amazing nurse leader, Miss Nada Joaquim. She's from South Miami Hospital, part of Baptist Health in Florida, and we sure hope everything's okay for you and your family down in Florida today. So we celebrate her leadership and tenacity in getting this study done all through COVID and done very well. And she even took actions with health administration leaders to make sure this important topic stays current and becomes permanent fixture in her health system. Nada, you've heard some highlights from Kathy and Bob, but please tell us your story and results, why you believe GSO policy and protocol should be adopted everywhere based on your examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. It is my great honor to be present here today to represent Baptist Health of South Florida, which is the largest healthcare system in South Florida, to speak about the outstanding collaboration our team had with the Global Strategic Operatives for Eradication of Human Trafficking team. So I just want to start off with the mission of our Baptist healthcare system, which is to improve the health and well-being of individuals and to promote the sanctity and preservation of life in the communities we serve. Baptist Health is a faith-based organization guided by the Spirit of Jesus Christ and the Judeo-Christian ethic. We are committed to maintaining the highest standards of clinical and service excellence, rooted in the utmost integrity and moral practice. Consistent with its spiritual foundation, Baptist Health is dedicated to providing high-quality, cost-effective, compassionate healthcare services to all, regardless of religion, creed, race, or national origin, including as permitted by its resources, charity care to those in need. So protecting patients' and human beings' lives, dignity, sanctity, preservation of life, and well-being is a value that Baptist Health South Florida upholds not just in words, but also in actions. There were no questions asked when the GSO approached our corporate CEO to participate in this initiative, as South Florida is considered one of the U.S. hotspots for human trafficking. South Miami Hospital, which is a hospital within Baptist Health, was one of the 6 U.S. sites that were chosen to collaborate with the GSO. Back in November, on November 12, 13, and 14 exactly, in 2019, South Miami Hospital hosted the training for our staff on human trafficking, which was led by the GSO team. The GSO expert speakers on human trafficking visited and conducted on-site training to our staff. They conducted 2 levels of training. A 1-hour level 1 included all staff and providers in the emergency department and all ancillary staff who might come in contact with a potential victim, such as registration, security, our obstetric ED staff, our phlebotomist, respiratory therapist, imaging, security, and our house supervisors. And a 2-hour training That included a more in-depth training for all our case managers and social workers. On the first day of the training, based on the recommendation by the GSO team, a leadership strategic meeting was hosted at South Miami Hospital, which included all the experts, our senior leadership team, and few community partners that work with trafficked victims, specifically Camilla's House, Christie's House, law enforcement, our state attorney office human trafficking unit, our DCF representative. And the purpose of the meeting was to establish a connection and facilitate collaboration in the event we have victims come through our facility. On that day, I met Tracy Rags of Homeland Security Investigations, and the discussion with Tracy and South Miami clinicians sparked really an immediate change in our policy as he clarified how non-citizens who need protection require a T visa so as not to be deported back to the non-citizens into dangerous situations and could cause that serious harm. Typically, we would call our local DA office, but in these cases, we should call the Homeland Security investigators. So these meetings proved to be very beneficial and enlightening to our organization and should be part of a very well-rounded human trafficking program. Following the training, South Miami Hospital participated in the research study led by the GSO and the University of Texas at Tyler. And the purpose of the study, as you heard, was to examine the effectiveness of the implementation of a trauma-informed trafficking in persons education for healthcare providers and staff, in addition to the adoption of organizational policies and procedures pertaining to the recognition, provision of trauma-informed care, and appropriate referral of trafficked persons in the acute care setting. The study was completed and the data was aggregated. I'm going to share with you some of the South Miami Hospital-specific data points. We had 52 respondents out of 197 total staff who attended the training, and the majority of the study participants were between 36 and 45 years of age, mostly females, of course, because we're mostly nurses. They were mostly nurses, and then they had between 0 and 5 years of experience in the profession. Prior to the training, only 5% felt very confident in their ability to identify human trafficking victims, while 34.5% felt not confident at all. Post-training, about 76% of our staff felt very confident to confident. Also, prior to the training, about 40% felt not confident at all in their ability to respond in a trauma-informed manner to victims, while post-training we had about 76.6% feeling very confident to confident. In addition, post-training, about 71% were extremely likely to consider potential victims as victims instead of criminals. So this speaks volume of the research conducted by Kathy and the team. On October 12, 2021, Baptist Health, our clinical practice steering council, basically approved the incorporation of the 2 training courses into our organization's online platform, which is Baptist Health University. And as of January 2022, all newly hired staff are now automatically enrolled into one of these 2 courses based on their role, whether they're licensed or unlicensed. As of the beginning of September 2022, BHSF, Baptist Health, had 2,391 licensed staff and 1,698 non-licensed staff who completed the training. In addition, the created human trafficking procedure, assessment algorithm, and the staff resource guide became system-wide tools, we're talking about 11 hospitals plus all our urgent cares, close to 100 plus. Currently, every patient is assessed and screened upon admission to the Baptist Health emergency departments, urgent care, and inpatient units for potential human trafficking. Finally, after the training, the implementation of hospital policy and the patient screening tool for potential victims, Baptist Health had a total 56 positively screened potential victims between the training, from the end of the training until present. By increasing staff awareness through training and education on human trafficking screening and identification, along with the use of a trauma-informed approach to intervene with victims, more potential victims will be identified and provided assistance in the hope to eradicate this epidemic. Baptist Health fully supports the GSO initiative. Thank you for allowing me to stand on the stage today to provide you with a glimpse of how this initiative has impacted the eradication of human trafficking by equipping our healthcare organizations with the necessary tools to keep fighting against this heinous crime. And we're looking forward to your kind endorsement for the human trafficking policy and protocols of for global healthcare providers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nada. That's an amazing story, an amazing success story. If I had it correct, it was pre and post numbers-wise, not besides the confidence levels, but it was like an increase of 300% that pre-numbers identified and post-numbers identified victims. Wow. Wow. Thank you. So, our next panelist, Tracy, I'm sorry I didn't get to see you come in. We had a little staggered entry there, but it's great to see you as always. Is someone who I have so much admiration and respect for. Mr. Tracy Rags has become a good friend of GSO. He's attended and supported a lot of GSO trainings from the very beginning. When he participated in the GSO training in South Miami Hospital, as we just heard, under the direction of Nada Joaquim, Tracy helped convene that first community clinical leadership meeting, which brought together all the external resources that they mentioned, law enforcement, DA's office, local Homeland, local FBI and shelters. This meeting went so well that we permanently incorporated these type meetings into every training. Tracy Rags is Acting Division Chief for Center for Countering Human Trafficking, Homeland Security Investigations in Washington, D.C. Tracy, you've always been there for us, and we're forever grateful to you. Would you now please share your experiences and why you feel the GSO work you've observed is right for today's tsunami of trafficking in persons crossing into all countries? Thank you, Tracy.
Well, thank you, Deb. I'm really honored to be here on this stage with all of these amazing people. This work is very important to helping the most vulnerable in our society. As a law enforcement officer, I've seen many things. I started in human trafficking. I started a task force in 2006 when I started a task force in Missouri for human trafficking. And from that task force, we saw so many victims that needed our assistance. We had to change the mindset of people thinking of what human trafficking was. It was thought of as prostitution. They want to be in that life. They can get out of that life. But as you work these cases, you see what's happening with these individuals. They can't get out of that life. They need our assistance. And as stated earlier by my colleagues, the majority of the people that I've interviewed or I've been in interviews with, they've all been through some medical service at local clinic, the emergency room, something. Not only talking about sex trafficking, but also forced labor. They've been there. No one has asked them, hey, what happened? Can I help you? Offered those resources that they needed to get them the help that they need. So as I started doing this, it became personal for me to make this my mission. So as I became the director and the chief of human trafficking, that was my thing. You heard earlier that we are still behind the curve. My thing is always to my agents out in the field: if we save one, we've done our job. If we can just save one, we cannot alone do this as law enforcement. We need our partners, and the medical facilities are those partners that we need. We need to have training. We need to have a protocol so they'll know what to do when they come across these victims. And that's why I'm so excited to be a part of this with you, Deb. You're right. You cannot say no to Deb. When Deb calls, you say yes. But it's a mission that you have to take up because there are people that need our help. So, as we go through this, in 2019, as we were doing our investigations, Homeland Security created what we call the Stop Trafficking Initiative. And what that is a strategic targeted outreach program. And I did that for 3 industries. Medical was number 1, transportation, and hospitality, because we saw the correlation between them and victims of trafficking. And that has paid off for HSI in the sense that in FY21, we have seen a 100% increase in referrals to our agency. That's just the HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. That's what we've seen. Those are referrals we probably would not have seen. We probably would not have gotten those to those victims sooner. And that's so important that we have these relationships with the healthcare industry. We've made in FY21, I'm going to tout some of the things we've done. We've had over 1,200 cases of human trafficking. We've done over 2,300 arrests, and we assisted over 728 victims that was victims of trafficking. May not sound like a lot when you look at 27 million, I heard it was being trafficked now, but that's the part that we're doing. We're playing our part, and it goes back to what I said earlier. If we do one, we've done our job. There's many to be done. We all have a part to play in this. As it was stated earlier, I was part of the initial discussion and the training. I look at this because this is my job. I don't think I'm doing anything special. This is what drives me. I don't even think of it as a job because it's a mission that needs to be done. People need our help. And as law enforcement, that's why we came to this job. As healthcare providers, that's why you went into this job, to help those that can't help themselves. We say that the medical field is at the front lines, especially with COVID. You're at the front lines now with human trafficking. You're seeing these people before anyone else will probably see them. You can make a difference with them. And that's why it's so important that we have training, protocols, procedures of how to address that when we see it. We are still, as law enforcement, educating prosecutors, judges, law enforcement on what human trafficking is. So we as partners, we have to partner together if we want to make a difference. The training I felt that we saw down there was very informative. It was something that I teach to law enforcement agents across the world. As healthcare providers are trained on human trafficking indicators and policies. They are in a place to be essential in the identification and rescue of these victims. The state of Texas thought it was so important. In 2019, they created a law that every healthcare professional will be trained on human trafficking. Real quick, some of their numbers. Since January of 2020, St. Luke Hospital has identified over 330 human trafficking victims. They have made over 100 referrals to law enforcement in Texas. That's huge for that to be done. They've directed over 2,000. They have given over 2,000 direct services of trafficking. That's dental, vision, counseling, physical. Those are the things that need to happen. We as law enforcement have to partner with our partners. And I think I'm pleading that this will be adopted because we need the help. These victims are out there. They need our help. And we can't do it alone. We have to work together as one. So I am very proud to be here on this stage to lend my expertise and do whatever I can, as always, Deb. So I thank you very much for giving me this time. Thank you.
Oh, do we need more like Tracy? You're so inspiring. Thank you for all you do for our country and for us. Thank you. So we're going to change it up a bit. We have two clinical leaders who have conducted GSO research pilot trainings in two separate sites in Italy. They both have extensive backgrounds on teaching best practices by educating champions as a model. One is Dr. Alessandro Stivano, and he's at the University of Sacred Heart in Rome, and Dr. Rosario Caruso, and at the University of Milan. We will now hear from both of them. And gentlemen, I hope you're listening from Italy. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rosario Caruso. I am a researcher at the University of Milan and head of the Clinical Research Service in Policlinico San Donato here in Northern Italy. And I would like to emphasize with these few thoughts that I would like to share with you how important was and how important is the education of champions that we had in the University of Milan and in the Policlinico San Donato according to the Human Trafficking Chain Research Study. This was fantastic because we started to increase the awareness of healthcare providers and the multi-stakeholders around our system about the problem of human trafficking that actually is an awful tsunami we are facing. And in this framework, I think it's important to acknowledge that we require a global, a universal policy and a protocol for healthcare providers worldwide, because we need to align what we do in the domestic settings with a global perspective for effectively managing, preventing, recognizing this terrible problem. And following these few thoughts, the colleague Alessandro Stivano is going to share additional thoughts about our involvement in this project. and our statement regarding how important it is having a voice. Please, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Rosario, and I would like to acknowledge the floor for listening to us. Briefly, I'm a researcher at the Center of Excellence for Nursing Scholarship. At the OP is the regulatory authority in Italy. And, with this fantastic project, I have collaborated with the University of the Sacred Heart in Rome, where we had education for nurses and nursing students, and nurses who were working especially in the emergency and in units where this kind of issues are present. The initiative was smashing and fantastic, and many professionals praised, the initiative. But it's also crucial to highlight that the policy that is going to be presented to the World Health Organization and should be adopted universally is really important, because now is the right time, to focus on this huge challenge for all countries in the world, for advanced and also, the other countries, low and middle income countries, because, this is a really a great, issue and challenge worldwide. And so I think this initiative is absolutely fantastic. And I would like to thank you again for being part of this great effort and great work. Thank you so much.
Our Italian colleagues, and very much thankful to Anna Sarah for her intervention in getting us there, and we'll hear from you in a second, Anna. Our next panelist, I'm very proud to introduce, Dr. Santosh Paulus, Senior Program Director for the Human Trafficking Program and Hospitalist, Site Director of Huntington Hospital at Northwell Health in New York. Dr. Paulus does not just work in the area of anti-human trafficking, he embodies it. It's his passion. It's not just his profession. Anyone that knows him, he and his entire family are involved in his nonprofit that raises awareness and fights against this horror. With the help of Willanda Green again, our GSO coordinator, she suggested to Santosh to have GSO come in and assist with conducting more trainings for the many hospitals that still needed to be trained at Northwell. So Santosh, please share some of your learnings from the extensive work you've done in this area, and we appreciate all that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that gets simultaneously excited and nervous when we get a phone call from Deb, so that's reassuring. Thank you, Ambassador. No, it's all good. Thank you, Ambassador, and also thank you to Jasmine and to Tanya. You guys are truly inspiring and just amazing leaders, so thank you. We've heard this morning so many times already the numbers, 50 million, right? 50 million victims of human trafficking globally. And studies show that 9 out of 10 trafficked individuals seek medical care while actively being trafficked. We've heard this over and over again today, how we have a unique position and opportunity within healthcare as healthcare providers and professionals. Yes, opportunities for healthcare professionals, opportunities in what feels like a paralyzing and hopeless landscape. We've heard it again and again how we need hope, right? All of us need hope. With proper training, healthcare professionals have opportunities to acknowledge red flags, identify victims and those at risk, and to intervene in a humanistic manner. Good morning. Actually, I'll be the first to say good afternoon because it's after 12 now. So, as you know, I'm a family medicine physician and a senior program director for the Northwell Health Human Trafficking Heart Program. HEART stands for Human Trafficking Education, Advocacy, Response, and Training. And we at Northwell echo the same mission as the United Nations Blue Heart Campaign by standing in solidarity with survivors of human trafficking in their commitment to combat this crime against human dignity. Next slide. I'm honored to be entrusted to represent Northwell, the largest healthcare organization in New York. Our message is simple: education drives action. Action is needed in our industry. We propose educational programming for healthcare professionals in alignment with the mission to implement a universal policy and protocol for healthcare providers worldwide. 5,000 plus and counting. 5,000 healthcare professionals that Northwell Health has trained in total over the last several years. And I'm here today before you to say that yes, it is possible for healthcare professionals to shift the narrative. We can approach with a humanistic focus. We can recognize, identify, and implement a trauma-informed, survivor-informed, person-centered, and culturally appropriate response to trafficked persons seeking health care. I want to focus on the person-centered portion of my previous statement just for a moment. You may have heard that traffickers do not exploit people, but rather they exploit vulnerabilities, like a person's financial class or status, their race or ethnicity, their gender or sexuality, their religious or political affiliation, or whatever other form of otherism traffickers notice to further marginalize, exploit, and exert control over another person. Human trafficking, in layman's terms, is the exploitation of people for profit. That's just a simple way to look at it. A person's humanity reduced to the equivalence of buying a pizza or picking a movie on Netflix. This evil reality is a disheartening You never see those moments coming. This evil reality is a disheartening reflection of our collective humanity. It should go without saying. It should go without saying that our response needs to be person-centered. This public health crisis demands a protocol for healthcare professionals worldwide that is urgently accepted, adopted, and implemented. Northwell Health, alongside other healthcare systems, have been successfully recognizing trafficked and at-risk individuals. The training provided has also shaped best practices to meet each person's unique needs as discovered in healthcare settings. With concerted efforts, we are amplifying the voices of marginalized communities simply by telling them, yes, I see you. You are not alone. You are heard. We have resources when you're ready. You matter. But the work is not easy. Next slide, please. I'm often asked why I do anti-trafficking work, why as a physician I would want to devote so much of my time in this specific area addressing this particular public health issue. In the words of social justice activist, public defender, and law professor Brian Stevenson, I don't do what I do because it's required or necessary or important. I don't do it because I have no choice. I do what I do because I'm broken too. He goes on to say, quoting writer Thomas Merton, "We are bodies of broken bones. I guess I'd always known, but never fully considered that being broken is what makes us human. We all have our reasons. Sometimes we're fractured by the choices we make. Sometimes we're shattered by things we would never have chosen. But our brokenness is also the source of our common humanity. It's the basis for our shared search for comfort, meaning, and healing. Our shared vulnerability and imperfection nurtures and sustains our capacity for compassion." Next slide. This proposal to the World Health Organization, a global health response to human trafficking in the healthcare setting, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to shed light in dark places and offer hope to those marginalized around the world. With your support, you will directly create millions of opportunities for those in tremendous need of hope. Hope is like oxygen. As a people, we won't survive without it, because the fact is, hope changes everything.
We all need more doctors like Santosh Paulus. Santosh, you fill my heart. Thank you. Okay, unfortunately, right after GSO completed training at Northwell Health, COVID hit. But Dr. Paulus recognized that the GSO training needed to have a broader reach. He then introduced us to Dr. P.M. Nair, next stop, India. We'll next hear from the two main professionals who coordinated our first GSO international pilot study. Dr. P.M. Nair is a career police officer for over 30 years, an investigator with the Indian Police Service. He's a chair professor of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. He's also carried out training for more than 11,000 police officials and prosecutors across India and set up 9 anti-human trafficking units. He's joined with Dr. Devasatham Mani, Associate Director of IJM, International Justice Mission, and they are a GSO pilot site participant in Chennai, India. I focus your attention to the monitor.
It was an interesting experience on the international front to have a training and a policy decision making when we all got together in empowering the medical professionals and the psychosocial professionals and social professionals working for the victims of human trafficking. The joint training program had a tremendous impact. First of all, the medical professionals were not aware of the dimensions of human trafficking. They got fully exposed to the entire dimensions on the issue of trafficking in persons. Secondly, they got to know what they can do in redressing the grievances of the persons, redressing the grievances of the victims of trafficking, whether it is sex trafficking or labor trafficking or organ trade or, for that matter, any type of exploitation. Third point is this training, this empowerment program, this capacity building program, I would call it that way, help the medical professionals to adopt a skilled approach and a rights-based approach. It's very important. Initially, they were thinking that it's a welfare act to come and give a medical care and move on. Now they are adopting a skill-based and a rights-based approach to the entire victims of trafficking. It gives a completely new dimension. It's a paradigm shift. Next point is they learned as to what to do with the victims of trafficking. First is identifying. Second is what to do with them. So initially, when the victims used to come, they might think it's a rape victim or a sexually violated victim, and that's all. Now the entire dimension of understanding the victim, oh, this is not simple rape case. It's a crime of trafficking. It's a crime of exploitation beyond rape. All those come to their mind, they come into our entire system. Thereupon, they knew or they realized what to do with that. It is not just giving medical care or a psychosocial care to the victim. That's very important. But at the same time, there is something called law enforcement too. Get the law enforced, otherwise you will not be doing full justice to the victim. So this part of integrating the response system with the law enforcement part was something new to the medical professionals when we trained them. Now this has come to stay. Then all stakeholders have converged together. First time in Tamil Nadu, in India, in the medical professional system, where they have not only the professionals in the field, but also activists, but also investigators, but also civil society. The IJM, International Justice Mission, for example, they stepped in, and that expertise that the IJM had was shared with all the participants that benefited them immensely. The first time, you have all stakeholders coming together and empowering the medical professionals, including the capacity building of them, skilling them. So from all dimensions, so we have different stakeholders coming in, and that contributed to the best part of the training program. Last but not the least, the international flavor. Dr. Santosh, Dr. Dev, they all brought such wonderful international experience to here, and they also took the international experience from India to that country too. That made a tremendous impact. We had students and participants from across the globe. I'm sure all of them benefited from the experience in India and experience in US and experience abroad. So that's very interesting confluence of the international experience in addressing the issues from a holistic manner.
At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Dev and each one of you for organizing the thought-provoking session on importance of health workers in combating human trafficking in India. Initially, while we were preparing for this training, some of us felt why there is a need for a medical professional to be involved in combating human trafficking. But after attending the training session, we all felt the health workers and the medical professionals can play a major role in identifying, release, and rehabilitation of victims of human trafficking. After attending this training, all the stakeholders felt there is no strong policy integrating medical professionals and other stakeholders in combating human trafficking in India. Therefore, we drafted the most effective and impactful policy and put that in practice for testing phase. This policy, completely focusing on victim-centric approach, we are sure that this policy will build responsibility and accountability among all the stakeholders involved in combating human trafficking in India. I would like to thank each one of you for this wonderful opportunity, and I also wanted to tell you we need more such training to build the capacity of medical professionals and other stakeholders in combating human trafficking in India. If this training session could create so much of impact, for sure that more such training would literally reach out many people across the country that would protect millions and millions of vulnerable victims from human trafficking. Thank you so much.
Well, only from my Indian friends and colleagues do I get elevated to a doctorate level. So I really appreciate that. Okay, thank you. You're all really terrific for hanging in there. Before we end our panel, I have asked two special people, special guests we have, and Patricia Speck and Ann Serra to just give us a minute or less of something. Let me just start with Pat. Pat is a professor, doctorate, coordinator, advanced forensic nursing, University of Alabama at Birmingham. And Pat was very significant in the contribution to creating this policy and protocol work, along with our AFN, Academy of Forensic Nursing colleagues, in conjunction with Kathy, Walanda, and me. I thank you and all the colleagues for their contribution of time and talent, Pat. And would you like to care to just share something for less than a minute? And when it's red, it's on. Try it out.
I think it's on. I want to thank you, Deb, and the ambassador for inviting me today. My first patient that I had was in the early 80s. There was not a name for human trafficking, and she was 8 years old. She was trafficked across state lines for the purposes of sex, and the FBI brought her to me. I was a family nurse practitioner in a public health clinic in a primary care. That is the person we want to reach with this protocol. There was no wraparound services. We didn't know what to do. And as a consequence, it put me on a lifetime journey of research and experiences with patients. I was compassionate, but it's not enough to feel the compassion. It is important to know the tools in the toolbox for trauma-informed care. I needed to learn how to create safety. That's in your protocol. Ask permission to discuss very sensitive topics, and then give permission for the developmental process of thinking that occurs as persons who are trafficked think about, I want to leave. My experience and research says they're thinking about it a lot. And my PhD students and I have research now to say that this is a developmental process. And the more we can hit them at their developmental milestones, and if they are young women, 10, 11, 12, I have to think of it as a developmental issue first. Then I have to think about what are they thinking, how are they thinking, and how safe are they. These women are at risk of death. We have to be very sensitive and not encourage them to leave before they are ready and have planned. The other thing is that when I see my elder patients have the diseases of trauma. That is the big five: strokes, heart attacks, COPD, these patients also need the trauma-informed care because they've stuffed it so deep. For these reasons, it was not available to me in the 80s, but it is available now. I want to thank you, Deb, for asking me.
You bet.
And my passion and my family, who has sacrificed time for me to be on my passionate journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat. Yes. Anna, and Anna Sarah is Senior VP of Patient Care Services and CNO of Greenwich Hospital in Connecticut. And I mentioned before she was invaluable in getting our Italian sites and friends there to get the training done. Anna.
I have to say, I met Debbie serendipitously through a mutual friend. And Mr. Garrett, you were correct. The compassion, the energy, I said, Debbie, sign me up. Tell me what you want me to do. So I was able, and it's truly an honor, Deb, to assist in the recruitment of the 2 healthcare sites in Italy. And working with Drs. Stiavano and Dr. Caruso, and you met them on the video, was truly a journey and a labor of love. The added bonus to me was actually not only translating the GSO training material, but when Deb said to me, Anna, by the way, you're going to have to present it in Italian. I said, okay, Deb, I can do that. But I have to say, it made me intrinsically aware. It heightened my senses, my moral compass. You know, it's pervasive, human trafficking worldwide, and we need to educate our healthcare providers. So I fully endorse the universal policy that's global, Deb, and we do have a moral obligation to do so. And I'm looking forward to partnering with you. I do want to bring the training and education, working with Yolanda at Greenwich Hospital at the Yale New Haven Health System, and hopefully we can expand that further.
Great.
So thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. And just very, very quickly, I just want to recognize our other special guest, Donna Hubbard. Next to Anna is a survivor, founder of Women at the Well Ministries, and a GSO member. And thank you, Donna, for being here. Yolanda Green, Human Trafficking Program at Northwell, and our GSO coordinator. Thank you, Yolanda. You're my right-hand gal. Hope it's okay to say that. Jennifer Graby, PhD, RN, assistant to Kathy Miller on the GSO research team, along with Michael Breen in Ireland. I hope, Michael, you're listening. And Coraline Griffith-Hunt, good friend of GSO. She's the senior legislative advisor and conducts evidence-based training programs. Thank you all so very much for being here and your help. Now, thank you for your patience. We come to the presentation of policy proposal. So you all have a copy of this. We need to get it into the hands of Dr. Tedros at the World Health Organization, and we are so very happy to have a few people that are willing, very high level here at the United Nations. Dr. Al Mareki, Special Advisor to Secretary General Guterres on Global Public and Private Partnerships. He'll be speaking to us through a live feed from the UK, and I hope they have been patient enough and waited for this time. Let's see if they're, oh yes, excellent. Dr. Al Mareki, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegate, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the UN ECOSOC Chamber, celebrating the completion of a 3-year human trafficking healthcare research, study, and policy development initiative. I wish that I could join you in New York to applaud all of you in the room for your commitment, dedication, and passion. I would also like to thank Ambassador Dr. Paul for his efforts on this project. As Under Secretary General and the Special Advisor on Public-Private Partnership and Islamic Social Financing, my role is to advise the Secretary General on innovative and dynamic approaches to tackling today's most complex global challenges. In an environment where climate change and conflict often take the limelight at world platforms, it is imperative that we not forget intractable trafficking of humans that continue to plague us. The documents presented to me today presented the seemingly unlikely role that healthcare workers can provide in combating the global trafficking of persons, thus positively impacting the lives of millions. Sharing best practices and standardizing policy and protocols have enormous benefit, especially in smaller countries who depend on others to assist them in their practices. I'm pleased to receive these documents, and I can assure you of delivery of the policy and protocol documents directly to the highest level of the World Health Organization, the Director General, Dr. Tedros. I will deliver them along with the collective hope you all share that they will be adopted and shared worldwide. Thank you for giving me this honor and opportunity to be here with all of you. I am humbled by the great work you have put to help millions of victims worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Mareki. And we will happily get this in a hard copy to your hands to deliver it to the World Health Organization, to Dr. Tedros. Thank you for your patience and being here. It's an honor and a privilege to meet you, and thank you so much. So next, I'm afraid that Alice Nadiratu is tied up with the Secretary General. So what we will do is ask Martine, her Chief of Office, to graciously accept this. Alice Nadiratu is the Special Advisor to Secretary General Guterres on prevention of genocide. And she feels very, very passionate about our anti-human trafficking work, our training, and our policy and protocol. So if you would come up, Martine, and accept this from the ambassador to give to Alice, we would be forever grateful.
Why don't we go to the center?
Yes. Yeah. Hope you will bring this right to Alice to get to Dr. Tedros' meeting. The ambassador will have last words, but then please don't go anywhere because we'd like to have a big group shot at the end, and then you're relieved.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here today. This has been a seminal, important, and significant time in the 900-year history of the Sovereign Order of Malta. We're deeply, deeply privileged to have been a sharer in the communication of this wonderful enterprise to help save lives. I'd like to close with a short prayer. We are a Catholic organization, and at the same time, we serve all of those who share the one thing that God has given all of us, which is our common humanity. Dear Lord, we're all made in your image and likeness, the victim as well as the perpetrator. And we ask you to pour your love and wisdom on those who suffer and those who aid the victims of human trafficking. Make them your messengers. And we ask you to turn the hearts of those who prey on the innocent and give them your spirit of peace, that they may see the error of their ways. And show all of us the power of love, the love that conquers all.
We did forego the Q&A, but if anyone has any burning questions or comments and want to say something now, you're free to push your button. I understand it's been a long morning, so if there isn't any. We're going to be here for a while, and you have some contact. I have some cards for contact. So, and also there's some GSO pamphlets on the table here. So please feel free, and thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists.